Votes for Women 2020, celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage. This is the title of a quilt now on display at North Plains Public Library. After 80 hours of work by its creators, it was completed in 2020, but its beginning goes back to 1975. The three women who created it gathered to tell us the story.
Well, I guess we'll talk about how the quilt came to be. It's in the library as a result of the volunteer work that I do here at the North Plains Library, and I just suggested at our quilt as a possible candidate for being displayed, and after they heard the story were excited and agreed to show it. And I was just recounting how it came to be, and Robin, I know you'll remember Lisa Mensa. She and I were in choir class together in 7th or 8th grade, and she during choir was hand piecing together a quilt, and I thought audaciously, oh, I could do that. I stitched 1 or 2 pieces together and said, oh, I can do that. So fast forward to whatever period, 1975, and it was going to be the bicentennial the next year. So I told my mom I would love to make a quilt, and she helped me.
Was your mama seamstress?
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
Although she had a quilting machine. Maybe she had that by then. That's a great question. She ultimately got one. Never did any quilting, but at least had the frame, so to do hand work.
Okay.
And so she helped me select all these fabrics, bicentennial fabrics that were, all different prints that you can see if you look at the pictures of the quilt. And we collected up several dozen samples of fabric.
Yeah, there's probably about that many. I'm definitely in the 20-ish range.
A great assortment
to
work from.
And nearly all of them were could be worked in and worked together. There were 2 that I just thought, I just can't make that fit. But anyway.
But everything else, yep. And we got some appliques. We got just a variety of things. And I had this great aspiration. And then time went by.
As it always does.
Yes, yep. And so after moving several times, I ultimately came across a popcorn tin, and everything fit in that tin and went on the shelf until 2019. So from 1975 to 2019. And in 2019, I had a really strong desire to bring those fabrics out and do something. So I called my good friend Robin and said, Robin, I know you're a quilter and I have this project. And so I'm going to let you talk about what happened from there.
Okay. Well, I was so compelled by the story that you had collected all these pieces with your mom. And your mom's been gone for a little while now.
Right.
And so it was sort of the memory making that was going to come along with whatever the quilt became. And then the fact that the fabrics were all these Americana, patriotic from 1976. And, we were friends back then. I don't know, it just seemed so fun to get involved. And because we wanted it to have something to do with Americana, because that's what the flags were, I started looking for patterns that I thought would work, and I knew it had to be scrappy, because there wasn't you get a quilt pattern and it's called shimmer, and you think, okay, I need a yard of this and it's 14 fat quarters, whatever it calls for, and I didn't have that. I just had what I had, so I knew it had to be scrappy, and with a lot of quilts, you need so many fabrics of a light value, a medium value, a dark value to make the stuff appear, and I didn't specifically have that. So it took me, I want to say, months.
It was.
Months to find a pattern I liked. I started a Pinterest board, I shared it, and every time I get a little obsessive, I'd add a few more to it. And I finally thought, I just got to dig in and start. So I picked the one called Shimmer, and I should have looked up who the designer of that pattern was, to give a little credit here. And I just started saying, okay, what's kind of lightish, what's kind of medium, what's kind of dark, what's going to work, because it's got this sort of star in the middle and everything's scrappy around it, and started cutting. And I think, well, the one little tiny funny part of the story is when I started sewing, it was right when COVID hit. So it's March of 2020. So I dinked around a long time, and now all of a sudden there's actually a time crunch because we wanted to finish in time for the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote, which was August
18th,
Yeah.
2020.
So now I got it. Now I do have to turn it on. And we had just gone to remote work, and you can do things during a meeting where your whole job is primarily to listen and to give feedback if you have to. But so that was a multitasking that was visual, so I could listen. And so in the basement of my house, I got my computer going. I'm in 2-hour-long meetings, and I'm actually sewing muted and video off.
Nice.
So that was just one of my little asides. I only did that because then I retired, and then I really by the time I'd retired, I had finished. However, anyway, so I would text. What I remember most is occasionally I'd get a little bit done, and I'd think, I think I'm really going to like this, but it took a while to really reveal itself.
Right. I remember that.
I would send a picture and say, it's coming along. I remember one of the early things was, you can see the star in the middle of each square, but it's not the vivid, bright, dark light.
Right.
You had to work a little bit to find the star, and we have, had some political conversations, which we're not going to have now, around some of the chaos of the time.
Right.
The chaos of COVID, the chaos of our political parties right now, and no matter which side you're on, right? So
Yep.
it kind of, the story of how here we were trying to celebrate the women's right to vote, trying to celebrate the American way, if you will, but some of the stars were a little hard to find in the chaos of the fabric, but then
Yes.
once it all was done, the tapestry was like just so, I loved it.
I remember seeing that for the very first time, and I'd be curious to hear your reaction of when you saw it. In fact, why don't you say what you thought when you saw it?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that was compelling to me about it was the fact that you had collected fabric from so long ago. And one of my favorite things to do as finishing quilts was to have somebody, usually it was like, oh, I have this unfinished top that was my great-grandmother's. So I love putting what I call life to the quilt as the final step of it. And this was such a different idea that you literally had the fabric from 40 years ago.
Exactly.
But this vision and this idea that comes full circle now to the times. And so I had no idea what to expect as far as what it was going to look like, because here's a non-quilter putting fabric together, and then you assembling it from, like you'd said, you work with what you have to work with, which is one of the most challenging things to do, that you can't add things in to make it work. You have to bring something out of the chaos. So when I received the quilt, I was unbelievably surprised at how great it looked, because I thought, oh, it's so hard to put something together if somebody doesn't really know the values you have to use when choosing fabric and that. So
She wasn't shopping for a pattern. She was just
right, it was just
was a
things that I
theme.
like.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it was a very specific theme. You go in the fabric store, and there was this row of fabrics, and those are the ones, quarter of that, whatever.
Yeah.
So, usually when I'm finishing a top that has a history like that behind it, I think about what that woman must have been like who made that. Like imagining a woman in the 1930s putting her quilt together and kind of really trying to connect with the spirit of the woman who put this together. So this was a very different experience in a really wonderful way, because it's like, here's somebody who had a vision a long time ago, and then this kind of current coming together now, and instead of this being a reflection on the women who put it together, it was really a reflection on women in general and what this quilt stood for, which is celebrating
Yes.
100 years later about a right that was granted that is probably one of the most important rights any American has, right? The right to vote and the impact that that can have. And I mean, it gives me chills now looking at the quilt, saying this was a compilation of that, which is so much bigger than one individual woman making a quilt, and you get to bring it to life for a family. So when you told me it was hanging in the library here, it was like,
I gotta go see it.
right, it has spread now beyond an idea and a collaboration to hopefully put some meaning. And the fact that when you look at the quilt, you can see that it mentions, you know, the celebration of the 100-year time frame, that means something. And I really hope we can have like younger women look at that and go, wow, it's only been 100 years. Right. So it was a really, really cool experience to go through that.
And on another level, I mean, Sue and I went to high school together 40 years ago, and we were really good friends then. And we don't live that far apart. There was for times we did, but I would say in those 40 years, we probably saw each other 10 times. I mean, it wasn't a bunch. And we had reconnected after, maybe it was the 30, I don't know, the most, whatever
reunion?
A reunion. Which is when we probably talked about the quilting and then, you know, a friend was in town, so we got together and reconnected. And but doing this, there was this, the kind of the dedication to it, the feeling close to how her experience with her mother, and wanting to like see it finished and to its fruition, and on the bed in her home. I mean, it's really been this wonderful, extraordinary friendship journey from, you know, the girls we were when we registered to vote, to kind of more outspoken women we are today, and learning how we each got here.
Yeah. And Jeannie and I met at work in celebration of women. Actually, it was because of the women's resource group where we worked together. So that's how we got to know each other and understood a little bit about each other's struggles and successes at work. And through just conversation, I found out that she finished quilts. And when I realized that the trifecta was available, oh boy, that's pretty bold. But it was such a gift to have people agree to help out in this just random project that, you know, who cares about that? And like you said, it's turned out, you know, I look at it, my husband looked at it and said, I see fireworks. I think of the chaos and just trying to have something that was enduring and would remind us of that time without being all about that time. So it's been an absolute gift to own that piece of art. And I am so grateful to the two of you for making it happen, because it would still be sitting in the little tin with the goose on it if not for your handy work.
But I mean, it's such a fun collaboration though, because the other thing I thought about is women used to come together, right, to do quilting as a quilting bee, and they're all working on the same frame, and that was their social time and their connection time. And now we have different technology for the most part, and we were still able to come together with the same medium, but a completely different approach. So it's like, it's still the same, yet it's a very different way to get to the same thing, which is a finished quilt that has meaning behind it for a purpose. You know, so I'm super happy to see it up here.
Well, in selfishness, I wanted to bring you to the North Plains Library so that you could see it. So there was a little bit of underlying motivation for me too, because I get to see our great library.
It's amazing.
So, well, thank you again for agreeing to talk about the project, and thank you for helping it come to life.
Thank
I'm really
you.
grateful.
It's a win for everybody, right? It's nice to come together on it.